A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. You know, most people think they understand the FBI because they've seen 1,000 police procedurals, but there is this fundamental weirdness at the heart of the Bureau that almost everyone misses. We're talking about an agency that can kick down a door for a bank robbery at 9 in the morning and then spend the afternoon tracking a foreign sleeper cell using top-secret signals intelligence.
It really is a bit of a constitutional and operational oddity when you look at it through the lens of global intelligence structures. Today's prompt from Daniel is about exactly that, this dual-purpose nature of the FBI as both a high-stakes intelligence agency and a federal law enforcement body. It's a hybrid model that doesn't really have a direct parallel in most other Western democracies.
It's like having a local detective who also happens to have a security clearance for the most sensitive secrets in the Pentagon. By the way, fun fact for the listeners, Google Gemini 3 Flash is actually writing our script today, so if we sound particularly enlightened, you know who to thank. But Herman, let's get into this. Why is this arrangement so rare? If you look at the United Kingdom, they have MI5 for domestic intelligence and the Metropolitan Police, or regional forces for the actual handcuffs. Why did the US decide to merge these two massive, often conflicting responsibilities?
To understand that, Herman Poppleberry here has to take you back to 1908. When the Bureau of Investigation was first formed, it was tiny, just 34 agents. It was originally just a way for the Department of Justice to have its own investigators instead of borrowing Secret Service agents. But because the U.S. has this very specific federalist system, we never wanted a national police force. That's a phrase that makes American lawmakers break out in a cold sweat. So, the FBI was built to fill the gaps between state lines.
Right, the classic, he crossed the state border, I can't catch him, trope from the old movies.
But then you have the World Wars and the Cold War. J. Edgar Hoover saw an opportunity to expand the Bureau's remit into counterintelligence. He realized that if you're already investigating federal crimes across the country, you're the best positioned agency to find foreign spies operating on U.S. soil. Instead of creating a separate domestic spy-catching agency, the U.S. just kept layering intelligence responsibilities onto the guys who were already chasing John Dillinger.
So, it was basically a matter of convenience, and a bit of a power grab by Hoover. But fast forward to 2026, and we have an agency with 35,000 employees and 13,000 special agents. How did they actually balance these two sides without the whole thing collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions?
It's a constant tightrope walk. On one side, you have the Criminal Investigative Division. These are the folks handling organized crime, white-collar fraud, public corruption, and violent crime. They operate under the standard rules of the U.S. Legal system. Everything they do is geared toward a public trial. They need evidence that can stand up in front of a jury, which means strict chains of custody and transparent witness testimonies.
And then on the other side of the hallway, you have the National Security Branch, or the NSB.
Right. The NSB was really formalized in 2005, largely as a response to the failures identified after 9/11. It houses counterterrorism, counterintelligence, and the cyber division. Their goal isn't always an arrest. Sometimes their goal is just disruption, or simply knowing. If they find a foreign agent, they might not want to arrest them immediately because that tips their hand. They might want to watch them for 5 years to see who they talk to.
That seems like a massive cultural clash. You have one group of agents whose metric of success is handcuffs on a guy, and another group whose metric is high-quality data points in a classified database. How do they even talk to each other?
Historically, they didn't. Before 9/11, there was what people called the Wall. It was a set of legal and procedural barriers designed to prevent intelligence information from being used in criminal cases without following strict due process. The idea was to protect civil liberties. You didn't want the government using secret spy tools to bust someone for a minor tax crime. But the side effect was that the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing.
I remember reading about that. There were instances where FBI intelligence agents had information about future hijackers, but they couldn't share it with the criminal agents who were looking for them because of those barriers.
Precisely. Post 9/11, that wall was largely dismantled by the Patriot Act and subsequent reorganizations. Now, the FBI is intelligence-led. This is a key phrase in their current doctrine. It means that intelligence shouldn't just be a separate silo. It should inform every criminal investigation, and every criminal investigation should feed data back into the intelligence loop.
That sounds efficient on paper, but it feels like it creates this weird gray area. If I'm an FBI agent, am I an investigator or a spy? And does the answer change based on which door I walk through that morning?
It often depends on the authority they are operating under. This is where the technical details get really interesting. When the FBI is doing a criminal investigation, they are governed by the federal rules of criminal procedure. They need probable cause for a search warrant. But when they are acting as an intelligence agency, they might be operating under FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. The standards for a FISA warrant are different because the primary purpose is foreign intelligence, not necessarily criminal prosecution.
But here's the rub, right? If they find evidence of a crime while they're spying under a FISA warrant, they can often pivot and use that information to launch a criminal case. That's where the civil liberties groups start getting very nervous. It feels like a backdoor way to bypass the Fourth Amendment.
That is the core of the political and legal debate we're seeing in 2026. The FBI argues that in a world where cybercrime and state-sponsored terrorism are blurred, you can't separate the two. Look at a major ransomware attack. Is that a criminal act for profit, or is it a state-sponsored attack on U.S. infrastructure?
It's usually both.
It is. So the FBI has to be able to use intelligence assets to find the source in a foreign country, but then also use criminal authorities to seize the servers or the cryptocurrency wallets. If you had two different agencies doing those jobs, the coordination would be a nightmare. The FBI's argument is that having one person or at least one office handle both is the only way to move fast enough.
Let's talk about the Joint Terrorism Task Forces, or JTTFs. This is how the FBI reaches down into the local level. I think people forget that the FBI isn't actually that large compared to the total number of police in the US. There are hundreds of thousands of local cops, and only 13,000 FBI agents.
The JTTF structure is really the secret sauce of domestic security in the US. There are over 200 of these task forces now. It's essentially a force multiplier. The FBI takes a handful of local detectives from, say, the NYPD or the Chicago PD, gives them federal security clearances, and sits them in an FBI office.
So you have a guy who knows the streets of Brooklyn, but now he also has access to the National Counterterrorism Center database.
It allows for a level of information sharing that didn't exist 25 years ago. If a local cop stops someone for a traffic violation and notices something suspicious that fits a national intelligence pattern, that info travels up the chain instantly. Conversely, if the FBI gets a tip from an overseas source about a specific neighborhood, they have the local guys who actually know the territory.
But doesn't that create a bit of a Big Brother vibe at the local level? Now your local police department is effectively an arm of the national intelligence community. Does that change the relationship between a city's police and its citizens?
It definitely can. There have been plenty of cases where local officers on JTTFs were involved in surveillance of community groups or houses of worship that wouldn't normally be allowed under local police department rules, but were permitted under federal intelligence guidelines. It creates a jurisdiction shopping problem. If the local law says you can't do X, but the Federal Intelligence Manual says you can, which one wins when the officer is wearing both hats?
It's usually the federal hat. The federal hat is almost always bigger and has more shiny gadgets attached to it.
Usually, yes. And this connects to the FBI's role within the larger intelligence community, the IC. We have 17, now 18, depending on how you count them. Agencies, you've got the CIA, the NSA, the DIA, and so on. Think about the Boston Marathon bombing in 2013. The FBI had actually received a tip from the Russian FSB about Tamerlan Tsarnaev years before the attack.
So the FBI is essentially the door through which the rest of the IC has to pass if they want to look at anything inside the United States.
Purses, they couldn't just keep him under surveillance forever without more evidence. They closed the lead. After the bombs went off, the FBI shifted instantly from intelligence agency that missed a lead to law enforcement agency running a massive manhunt. They used every forensic tool in the shed to identify the suspects in days.
That is a perfect example of the pivot. But it also highlights the damned if you do, damned if you don't aspect.
And that has led to some legendary friction between the agencies. The CIA often feels the FBI is too legalistic and clumsy, while the FBI often thinks the CIA is too reckless and unaccountable. But since the creation of the Director of National Intelligence, there's been a massive push to force them into a more cohesive unit.
You mentioned the Cyber Division earlier. With the expansion of the FBI's Cybercrime Division in 2025, it feels like this dual role is getting even more complicated. In the digital world, the line between crime and war is basically non-existent.
That is where the FBI is focusing a huge amount of its modern research. Think about a group like Volt Typhoon, the Chinese-sponsored hacking group. They aren't just stealing credit card numbers, they are embedding themselves in our power grid and water systems. Is that a crime? Yes, it's unauthorized access to a computer. Is it a national security threat? Absolutely.
So the FBI agent investigating that has to be a technician, a lawyer, and a spy all at once.
And they have to coordinate with CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, and the private sector. The FBI is increasingly acting as a bridge to private companies. If Microsoft or Google sees a state-sponsored attack, they don't call the Army, they call the FBI. The Bureau then has to decide, do we use this for a name and shame indictment? Even if we know we'll never catch the hackers in Russia or China, just to signal to the world that we know what they're doing. Or do we keep it quiet and try to hack back or monitor the connection?
The name and shame. Indictments always fascinate me. From a law enforcement perspective, they seem useless because the suspects are never going to set foot in a U.S. courtroom. But from an intelligence perspective, they are a massive flex. It's the FBI saying, "We saw you, we know your real names, we know what building you work in, and we've mapped your entire network."
It's a very modern form of deterrence. It's law enforcement as a weapon of statecraft. And that's something you just don't see with a typical police force. The LAPD doesn't issue indictments against people in Tehran to make a geopolitical point.
Not yet anyway, give it time. But let's look at the flip side, the National Security Letter, or NSL. This is one of those FBI tools that feels very cloak and dagger compared to a standard police search warrant.
The NSL is a perfect example of the FBI's unique authorities. It's an administrative subpoena. It doesn't require a judge's signature. The FBI can issue it to a bank, a phone company, or an internet service provider to get basic subscriber information. And, this is the controversial part, it usually comes with a gag order. The company isn't allowed to tell the customer that the FBI is looking at their records.
If a local cop wants my phone records, they need a warrant, and eventually I'm going to find out about it. But with an NSL, the FBI can operate in total silence for years.
Right? And while the FBI argues these are essential for fast-moving counterintelligence cases, critics point out that they have been used tens of thousands of times a year, often for cases that seem more like standard criminal investigations. It's that authority creep we talked about. When you give an agency two toolboxes, one with strict rules and one with loose rules, they are naturally going to reach for the one with the loose rules more often.
It's also interesting to see how this plays out internationally. Because the FBI has this dual role, they have legal attachés or legats in U.S. embassies all over the world. They aren't spies, at least not officially. They are there to coordinate with foreign police.
But they are often doing intelligence work under the guise of police cooperation. If the FBI is working with the French police to track a terrorist, they are sharing intelligence that may have come from the NSA or CIA. This makes the FBI a very powerful diplomatic player. They can offer foreign countries access to U.S. law enforcement resources in exchange for intelligence cooperation.
So they're basically the world's most powerful friend with benefits for foreign intelligence services.
In many ways, yes, but it also creates friction with the State Department and the CIA, who feel the FBI is sometimes coloring outside the lines in foreign policy.
I want to go back to the 2016 Russian interference investigation, because I think that's the most famous example of this dual-role tension in recent history. It started as a counterintelligence probe, trying to understand what a foreign power was doing. But then it morphed into a massive criminal investigation with multiple indictments and trials.
That case is a masterclass in the pivot. The FBI was using intelligence tools to monitor foreign actors, but as soon as they saw potential crimes by U.S. persons, they had to decide whether to switch to criminal mode. The problem is, once you go criminal, you have to worry about discovery. If you take a guy to trial, the defense has a right to see the evidence against him. If that evidence came from a top-secret intelligence source, you might have to drop the case to protect the source.
This is the gray mail problem. A defendant says, "If you prosecute me, I'm going to demand to see all the secret files that prove I did it," knowing the government would rather let him go than show those files.
And the FBI deals with this more than any other agency. The CIA doesn't have this problem because they don't prosecute people, they just neutralize the threat or move on. But the FBI's mission is to seek justice through the court system. This creates a massive incentive for the FBI to sanitize their intelligence, finding a way to discover the same information through legal, unclassified means, so they can use it in court without revealing their secret sources.
That sounds like a lot of extra work. Okay, we know he's a spy because we tapped his satellite phone, but now we need to find a way to pull him over for a broken taillight, so we can accidentally see the secret documents in his passenger seat.
It's called parallel construction. And while it's a standard tactic, it's deeply controversial because it effectively hides the true origin of an investigation from the judge and the jury.
It's basically the ends justify the means, wrapped in a blue windbreaker.
That's a cynical way to put it, but it's not entirely wrong. The FBI would argue it's the only way to protect the country and the Constitution at the same time.
Let's pivot to the civil liberties side of things. We're in 2026, and the debate over Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act is still raging. For the listeners who aren't policy nerds, this is the law that allows the government to collect communications of non-U.S. persons located outside the U.S. without a warrant.
But, as we know, those non-U.S. persons are often talking to Americans, so the FBI ends up with a massive database of incidental collection on U.S. citizens. The FBI can then query that database using an American's name or email address.
Without a warrant.
They argue it's just looking through data they already legally possess. But critics call it a backdoor search. In the last few years, the FBI has come under fire for using these queries to look up people involved in political protests or even members of Congress.
This is where that conservative worldview we share really starts to perk up. There's a deep skepticism of centralized power, especially when it's unelected and operating in the shadows. If the FBI can use national security authorities to bypass the warrant requirement for domestic criminal matters, that is a profound shift in the relationship between the state and the individual.
The FBI's intelligence branch is now heavily focused on data analytics. They are trying to move from reactive law enforcement, solving a crime after it happened, to proactive intelligence, preventing the crime before it happens. The Bureau is in this weird position where they are being attacked from all sides. The left thinks they are over-policing minority communities, and the right thinks they have been weaponized against political opponents.
And the Bureau's response is usually, "We're just following the facts wherever they lead," which is the ultimate non-answer. But let's look at the practical side for a second. If I'm a business owner, and I think I'm being targeted by a foreign intelligence service, maybe they're trying to steal my patents, who do I call? Do I call the local police, or do I call the FBI?
They can keep that watch going for years, mapping the network, waiting for the one mistake that allows the law enforcement side to step in and make the arrest. The FBI has entire squads dedicated to economic counterintelligence. They will come in, look at your network, and help you understand if it's a script kiddie in a basement or a professional team from a foreign military.
Because the FBI is this hybrid, it means they are constantly under the microscope of both the judiciary committees and the intelligence committees in Congress. They have twice as many bosses in the legislature, too.
And the Department of Justice Inspector General. The OIG reports on the FBI are some of the most detailed and devastating critiques of government power you will ever read. They don't pull punches. Whether it's the investigation into the Clinton emails or the Russia probe, the OIG is the one that goes in and says, you followed the rules here, but you completely ignored them there. That level of internal but independent oversight is something you don't see as much in other intelligence agencies because their work is so much more cloaked.
Right. The CIA can just say sources and methods and shut down most conversations. The FBI can try that, but eventually, if they want to put someone in jail, they have to show their cards in a discovery process.
That's one of the few analogies I'll allow. But seriously, the complexity of that task is staggering. Think about the sheer volume of data they have to process. Every day, they are getting millions of signals from the NSA, thousands of tips from the public, and reports from tens of thousands of local police officers.
This is where the AI comes in, right? We're talking about a scale of data that no human, or even a team of 13,000 agents, can possibly parse manually.
The FBI has been very open about their investment in automated analysis. They are using large language models and machine learning to identify patterns that might indicate a budding terrorist plot or a complex financial fraud scheme. But again, this brings us back to the black box problem. If an AI tells an FBI agent that person A is a high-risk threat, and the agent uses that as the basis for a FISA warrant, how do we know the AI isn't just hallucinating or biased?
Or if the AI is just picking up on wrong think or political dissent that should be protected by the First Amendment. It's the Minority Report scenario, but with more spreadsheets and fewer psychics.
It's a real concern. And the FBI's dual mandate makes it worse because an intelligence failure is seen as catastrophic. Think 9/11, so the pressure to find the needle in the haystack is immense. That pressure often leads to overcollection, where you just grab everything and hope the algorithm finds the bad guy.
It feels like the FBI is fundamentally a 1900s agency trying to operate in a 21st century digital reality, and the dual role is the bridge they're using to try and stay relevant.
I think that's a fair assessment. They are trying to be the everything agency, and while that makes them incredibly powerful, it also makes them incredibly fragile. Every time they lean too far into the spy role, they lose the trust of the public who sees them as a domestic Stasi. Every time they lean too far into the cop role, they get criticized for missing the next big national security threat.
So, what are the practical takeaways for our listeners? I mean, most of us aren't foreign spies. At least, I hope not, Herman. And most of us aren't planning federal crimes. Why does this organizational structure matter to the average person?
First, it helps you understand why the news looks the way it does. When you see an FBI investigation that seems to change gears suddenly, like going from a quiet inquiry to a massive raid, it's often because the authority they are operating under has shifted. Understanding that pivot is key to being an informed citizen.
Second, it's about knowing your rights. If the FBI knocks on your door, you need to understand that they aren't just police. They have a different set of tools and a different set of objectives. The "I'm just here to help" routine might be true from a law enforcement perspective, but from an intelligence perspective, they might just be looking for a human source to feed into a larger database.
And third, it's about the future of our democracy. The debate over the FBI's dual role is really a debate over how much power we are willing to give the federal government in the name of security. There is no easy answer, but the more we understand the technical and legal mechanisms they use, the better we can hold them accountable.
It's that old Benjamin Franklin quote about trading liberty for safety. The FBI is the physical embodiment of that trade. They are the ones actually making the transactions on our behalf every single day.
And they are doing it with a level of technical sophistication that Franklin could never have imagined. I mean, we're talking about an agency that can now use facial recognition across every DMV database in the country, combined with geolocation data from your phone and financial records from your bank, all tied together under a national security justification.
It's impressive and terrifying in equal measure, but I think we have to give them some credit. Managing that dual role without turning into a full-blown military junta is actually a pretty impressive feat of bureaucratic engineering.
It is. The U.S. system of checks and balances, the courts, the congressional oversight committees, the inspectors general, they are all that stand between the FBI and total unchecked power. And as we've seen, those checks are often under immense strain.
especially when the threats are as abstract as cyber warfare or domestic extremism. Those terms are so broad, they can be used to justify almost anything.
Which is why we need to keep asking these probing questions, as you like to call them. We can't just take the "trust us, we're the experts" line at face value.
Trust, but verify. Another classic. But speaking of experts, I think we've thoroughly nerded out on the Bureau for one day. I'm starting to feel like I need a security clearance just to finish this conversation.
You might. But before we go, I want to leave the listeners with one last thought. The FBI is currently undergoing another massive shift, this time toward proactive prevention using predictive analytics. They aren't just looking for who did it, they are trying to figure out who might do it.
That's the ultimate dual role. Tension. Prevention is an intelligence mission, but punishment is a law enforcement mission. If you prevent a crime before it happens, did a crime ever actually exist? And can you legally detain someone for a crime that didn't happen because you were too good at your job?
That is the legal frontier of the 2030s, and the FBI is already standing on the edge of it.
Well, on that slightly ominous note, I think we'll wrap this up. This has been a deep dive into the weird hybrid world of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Thanks as always to our producer Hilbert Flumingtop for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes.
And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this show and allow us to process all this data, though hopefully not for the same reasons the FBI does.
If you're enjoying these deep dives, do us a favor and leave a review on whatever podcast app you're using. It genuinely helps us reach more people who want to understand the how and why behind the headlines.
This has been My Weird Prompts. We'll see you in the next one.
Stay curious, and maybe keep an eye on your webcam. Just saying.
Goodbye, everyone.
See ya. This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash. Text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, my